The line began to break. German infantry forced fragile boats across the Meuse under intense French fire, while Stukas struck the river defenses and pushed the entire sector toward collapse. What looked like a local crossing was actually the trigger point of a far larger operational trap, built to pull Allied strength north and break France at its center. Artillery delays, missing boat crews, and heavy casualties should have stopped the assault, but instead, confusion on the French side opened the fatal gap. How had months of planning and deception made this moment possible? And once Sedan gave way, was France already doomed? What happened next turned a breach into collapse. The operational concept took shape under Manstein, who rejected the existing approach as too predictable, and instead aimed to lure Allied strength north, then rupture the center. Army Group A would drive the best mechanized units through the Ardennes first, racing for the Meuse between Sedan and Namur, betting everything on speed over comfort. Roads were narrow and few, so columns abandoned normal spacing, compressing almost bumper to bumper, a self-made vulnerability that demanded air cover just to survive movement. Consequently, the Luftwaffe layered much of its fighter strength over the Ardennes routes, pushing back Allied air attacks and shielding the packed columns as they surged westward. At the spear point sat 19 Panzer Corps under Guderian, the key Bugungskrieg theorist, commanding 1st, 2nd, and 10th Panzer Divisions with Grossdeutschland attached. Across the line, French planners stayed convinced the main blow would come through the Netherlands and Belgium, and that belief shaped everything that followed at Sedan. Plan D sent 3 French armies and the entire BEF north into Belgium toward the Dill River, and air priorities followed them, thinning the Ardennes and Sedan sector. German armor doctrine completed the snare. Panzers were concentrated to strike decisive points and exploit breakthroughs, not scattered as infantry support across static divisions. German vehicles carried two-way radios, turning formations into coordinated machines in motion, while French coordination lagged, and tempo began tilting irreversibly. The trap was set through misdirection, concentration, and communication, 3 pillars that would transform tactical crossings into strategic collapse across 46 devastating days. At 5:30 a.m. on May 10, 1940, 19 Panzer Corps crossed into Luxembourg, and by 10 a.m. leading units crossed again into Belgium, acceleration made operational. That same first day, German forces near Maastricht crossed the Albert Canal, after Eben Email was neutralized by a pre-dawn airborne assault that cracked a key barrier. Elite Fallschirmjäger arrived silently by glider on the fort's roof, destroying turrets and casemates with shaped charges, a precision strike that disoriented Allied expectations. By noon on May 11, the 1,000-man garrison surrendered, opening the way to Liège, and reinforcing the illusion that the main German thrust was in the north. In the Ardennes, Belgian defenses were thin, a small force of chasseurs Ardennes, meant to delay and withdraw, not to stop massed mechanized force. French screening collided with the onrush when the 2nd Light Cavalry Division's advance guard met leading elements of 10th Panzer near Habe-la-Neuve in a meeting fight. The cavalry was overwhelmed, retreating that night with heavy casualties, and the withdrawal rippled along the boundary lines, widening gaps faster than staffs could map them. The 5th Light Cavalry Division was also roughly handled near Neufchâteau and forced back, and the movement carried unintended, disastrous consequences for Sedan's approaches. As coordination frayed, a Spahis commander pulled back behind the Meuse farther west, even without direct contact, and the left flank opened like an unguarded door. A 1st Panzer Division motorcycle reconnaissance battalion found that open flank and reported it, and by the night of May 11th Germans were across the Semois at Meuse. Overhead, French reconnaissance flights did spot massive German movement through the Ardennes, including mechanized and armored forces traveling with bridging equipment. Air Force General François d'Astier forwarded those reports to the High Command, but the strategic fixation held, and the Ardennes warning failed to harden Sedan in time. On May 12, 1st Panzer reinforced its Semois bridgehead at Meuse and crossed at nearby Bouillon, while pressure mounted toward the Meuse crossings. The pieces were aligning. German spearheads compressed toward the river, French attention locked north, and the fatal moment at Sedan approached with mechanical precision. On May 13th, lead elements of Panzer Group Kleist crossed the Meuse, and relentless Stuka pounding shattered French morale in the sector guarding the weak extension. The penetration did not break the Maginot Line head-on. It slipped through a weaker stretch along the Belgian frontier, undermanned and defended by lesser-quality troops. At 1600 hours on May 13th, boatloads of German infantry began crossing, with bulk among the leading craft, committing bodies across water before heavy support fully arrived. Despite the air and suppression, heavy French fire greeted the first waves, inflicting severe casualties, yet the crossing held, because momentum mattered more than loss. Engineers pushed forward and began building a pontoon bridge at 1830, converting a fragile foothold into a logistics artery that could carry guns and armor. By sunset, the heights on the southern bank were in German hands, giving observation and leverage, and turning the river line from barrier into springboard. The 10th Panzer faced a harder fight but still formed a small bridgehead, while scattered surviving French guns and bunkers slowed, not stopped, the expanding lodgements. On the right flank, 2nd Panzer was initially rebuffed, then tried again, and by 2000 hours it had created its own small lodgement, completing a 3-pronged crossing. In darkness, bulk pressed on, driving 6 miles to to Kemery, and that deepening thrust threatened lateral positions, forcing French resistance near Donchery to recoil. Units opposing 2nd Panzer feared being flanked by Bulk's advance and fell back, and the cumulative shock began to unravel the French 55th Division's cohesion. Once that division disintegrated, the bridgehead stopped being a local crisis and became an operational rupture, as German crossings turned into a steady armored flow. On May 15th, Guderian's 19 Panzer Corps broke through the French line and headed west into open country, a pace so fast it looked like catastrophe by old standards. The armored salient was narrow and exposed, yet momentum became protection, because a fast-moving spear point forces defenders to react before they can concentrate. On May 17th, Guderian crossed the Oise and entered the Somme Valley, using rivers not as obstacles but as waypoints, driving deeper into systemic collapse. By May 20th, reaching the English Channel severed communications between Allied forces north and south, turning the northern armies into a pocket with shrinking exits. Meanwhile, other crossings fed the widening breach. 7th Panzer Division crossed the Meuse near Dinant on May 13th, and another bridgehead was forced at Munthem. On May 15th, Reinhardt's XLI Panzer Corps crossed at Munthem and shattered the French line, and together with Guderian these thrusts opened a 60-mile breach. While the center cracked, Army Group B made short work of the Dill line from Antwerp to the French frontier, confirming the Allied fear. Yet it was the wrong fear. On May 21st, a British counterstroke at Arras hit 7th Panzer Division, and even without air cover it shocked the German army, briefly jolting the advance rhythm. But disrupted Allied communications and limited ability to exploit meant the setback stayed localized, and the larger trap kept closing as German armor held initiative. On May 24th, as German units neared the Canal defense line close to Dunkirk, an inexplicable order from Hitler halted the advance and even pulled units back. That pause turned the retreat into a race for embarkation, giving Allied forces time to consolidate coastal defenses and begin the evacuation before the pincers shut. Evacuation began in earnest on May 27th, and urgency spiked when Belgium's King Leopold III surrendered his army, tightening the pockets pressure and shortening time. Over Dunkirk, the RAF achieved at least temporary air superiority, and sea power took over the edge of the map, holding a corridor open under constant threat. A motley fleet of around 700 civilian boats joined the effort, multiplying lift capacity and turning the shoreline into a moving pipeline of men under fire. By June 4th, about 198,000 British and 140,000 French and Belgian troops had been saved, but the trap still achieved its aim. Armies were separated and France bled out. As the campaign rolled south, Paris was evacuated by the French army and the Germans entered the city on June 14th, the political center abandoned to preserve it. 3 days later, on June 17th, Pétain asked the Germans for honorable armistice terms, signaling that the operational defeat had become a national decision point. On June 21st, surrender terms were dictated in the railway car at Compiègne in the presence of Hitler, a symbolic reversal designed to crush confidence along with armies. On June 22nd, the French accepted those terms, yet were required to conclude a separate armistice with Italy, delaying the formal end even as the outcome was sealed. Finally, at 0:35 on June 25th, 1940, hostilities between France, Germany, and Italy ended, and the trap's mechanism stood revealed: speed, air power, and severed lines. The deadly logic ran from quiet months of planning, to Ardennes compression, to Meuse crossings, to a bridgehead that became a breach, then a dash to the channel. Sedan was the hinge, where artillery delays were offset by Luftwaffe shock, boats crossed under fire, engineers bridged the river, and heights fell by sunset. Once crossings multiplied, French counteraction broke on confusion and timing, while radio-linked panzers exploited every gap, turning local retreats into cascading disintegration. When the channel was reached, the northern Allied mass was cut off, and even evacuation could not restore the lost equipment, cohesion, and strategic freedom. And that is how the trap worked: misdirection north, rupture at the Meuse, momentum to the sea, then collapse, all inside 46 days.